So the very first prompt is riches to, wait, that's not right. Hello everybody, my name is Kelsey and we're about to get very, very nerdy with some historical romance recommendations. So for any of you guys who've been around for a few years here on this channel, you will have noticed that in the last year or two, I really got into like historical romances. I've always loved historical romances, but primarily in the last year or so, I've really just kind of like accepted that fact about myself basically and really dived deep into them as books, as a genre, what have you. So I am actually participating next week. If you're watching this on the day it comes out, next week is the Historical Romance Readathon, which takes place primarily on Instagram, but most of the people who are like the hosts of it do have booktube channels. I can't remember exactly who is hosting this time around, so I'll leave them all linked down below, as well as the Instagram information if I can find a way to link it. I'm not sure if I can link specific things, but if I could find it, I'll link it down below. But basically, it's a week where you read historical romances based on a tic-tac-toe board. So I thought, in preparation, that maybe I should do kind of like a recommendation or something that's like historical romancy to lead up to it. So the next couple of videos from me are going to be very historical romance themed, but today we're going to be doing a recommendation video, primarily focused on the books or the prompts that are from the tic-tac-toe board. I'll put it right here. So you're just trying to find prompts that fit these. Now, not all of them are things that I can recommend for, like primarily everything but two of them are things that I can give you good recommendations for. But two of them, one of them being the author they're going to highlight every year they do, or every time they do a round, they do highlight an author. I'm not sure if they're always indie, but I know the last time it was indie. And this one is Julia Garwood. I haven't read anything by her, so I can't recommend any books by her. And then the other category or prompt is a Western, and I don't really read very well any Westerns, to be honest. So besides those two, I'm going to recommend everything else on this tic-tac-toe board. Now, a lot of the books on here can cross over from different prompts, but I thought I would do one book per prompt just to give you guys more recommendations. I've talked about a lot of these recently, so I'm sure you've heard me mention them before, but if you haven't picked them up yet, here is your sign. If you've been thinking about it for a while and you've heard me talk about these books, this is your sign. You should do it. But without further ado, let's dive in. So the very first prompt is Rags to Riches, and for this one I'm primarily going to be focusing on The Duke Undone by Joanna Lowell. So this is the first, and right now there's only two books out, but there will be a third book next year, all kind of companion stories set in a Regency England time period. Actually, a lot of these are going to be set in like a Regency England time period because that's what I like to read. So this follows our main character, Lucy, and she is a painter at the Royal Academy. And one night she literally stumbles upon a naked male body in the street. So she does a decent thing, covers him up, sends for help, and runs away. But she can't get his body out of her head, so she paints him. So it turns out this man is a man named Anthony, and I believe he is an earl, but I'm not 100% sure. He's something fancy. And he's just kind of taken over his property, kind of trying to come into his own man, and he finds his naked body on display somewhere, and the two of them strike up a acquaintance of sorts. So this is Rags to Riches because Lucy comes from a very lower income, lower class at this time period. I believe she lives with her mother. It's been a while. I can't remember if it's her mother or her grandmother, but she lives with someone who makes dresses, and she is just trying to become a painter, basically. So it's the two of them and their relationship. So Rags to Riches because of Lucy's standing in this one. But it's quite cute. It's got a lot of, good adventure if you're someone who likes a lot of plot as well as just, your romance, but you want some plot to your romance. This is definitely a good one to go with. The next one is to read a book featuring a single parent. So for this one, I'm going to go with Sir Philip with Love by Julia Quinn. This is the fifth in the Bridgerton series, but these are all following different characters, so this doesn't really spoil a whole lot. It spoils Colin's story just the tiniest bit, but beyond that, you can read these separately, whatever you want to do. But this one specifically follows Eloise, who is the second oldest daughter, fifth sibling of the Bridgerton family. This book kind of starts with Eloise and this cousin of hers, Sir Philip. He actually married Eloise's distant cousin, and then Eloise's cousin ends up dying, and she strikes up a friendship by first, you know, sending him condolences, and then they strike up this year-long conversation. And he basically is trying to find a new wife for his two kids, and he kind of invites her to come stay with him to see if they would fit, and she, on a whim, takes him up on that. So she shows up on his doorstep, and it's the two of them in the situation with these two super rambunctious kids, and watching that relationship. He is very into like botany and things like that, so it has that aspect to it as well, but it's also following this man who's trying to be a good dad and, you know, trying to figure out what a good dad is. Super cute. I absolutely adore it. But yes, a good single parent kind of story. The next one is a second chance romance, and the one I picked for that one is The Book of Scandal by Julia London. This is the first in this series, which I believe is just called The Book of Scandal or something like that. And this one follows two characters, Nathan Grey, who's the Earl of Lindsey, and his wife Evelyn, who have become estranged for a very long time. He lives out in the country, she is in England or in London, and like they don't even live together because of some situations that have happened in the past. But there is this book of scandal that is supposed to be coming out. I believe the princess is actually, no, the Prince of Wales has catalogued a shocking exploits of the outrageous Prince Regent and many of his noble friends in a book that has all of London aflutter. It says it right there on the back. And it's hinted that his wife, Nathan's wife, our main character Evelyn, might possibly be in this book. So he basically forces her to come back to the country with him to save her from any kind of scandal, and it's the two of them rekindling their whatever they have. I will say trigger warnings for this one for death of a child. It's heavily talked about. It's not like on the page, like you don't see it, but it's talked about for years and years and years. So I thought this was relatively good. I had a couple of issues with our main character, but he didn't do anything weird. It was just like the way he went about things. So keep that in mind, but otherwise pretty good book, I would say, for second chance romance. And I loved seeing these two characters find their ways back to each other. Next one is a book in a series, and honestly, everything I think, except for like maybe one or two things, two things later on, is part of a series. So you could use any of these, but of course I had to take this opportunity to talk about one of my favorites, which is the Regency Vows series, starting with To Have and to Hoax by Martha Waters. I adore this series. Still one of my favorite historical romances of all time is this first one. And this one follows our two main characters, Lady Violet and Lord James. And they have been married for 5 years, but 1 year into their marriage, they had a huge fight and haven't talked for years. And this book really kicks off when Violet is told that her husband has had an accident. Well, he twisted his ankle falling off a horse. She hears falling off a horse, freaks out, runs to his bedside, sees that he's totally fine, and she gets really bitter and decides to get him back, even though it really wasn't his fault as to why, you know, she was given misinformation. And so they're kind of trying to maneuver each other, basically, and their banter is beautiful. I love seeing their relationship kind of rekindle. This is a second chance romance as well, and just kind of seeing them come back to each other. But again, that banter, especially because they do a lot of their bantering in public and just the things that they say to each other in front of other people. It's so funny. So I adore this one. If you like shenanigans, if you like that kind of rom-com feel where there's always something happening, kind of like a prank war of sorts. It's not quite a prank war, but it's got that feel to it. I highly, highly recommend this one. The rest of the series is great as well, but I adore the first one. The next one is a standalone in reverse to that one, and this is one that I just recently read this year, and that is called The Valet Secret by Josie S. Kilpack. Now, I wanted to mention this one on this list specifically because a lot of historical romances are going to have some of those more steamier, smuttier scenes, and this one is not one of those. Now, you can find historical fictions, historical romances that don't have smutty scenes if you're someone who doesn't like that, but a lot of them tend to. So I wanted to make sure I mentioned at least one that doesn't have that if you are someone who's not a huge steamy scene person. This one's kind of a mistaken identity of sorts, and also our couple is a little bit older in this book. You usually see books, especially Regency books, where they're relatively young, like before 20, early 20s. This one follows our two main characters in their 40s. So I just loved seeing that representation as well. I'll make sure to leave my Goodreads review if you'd like to check out all of my thoughts on this one. But we follow our main character Kenneth, who is kind of coming into his own. He is being given this earldom, so he goes to, I believe it's his uncle, who is the current earl, to kind of learn how to be an earl. And so you follow him, and then you also follow Rebecca, who is, you know, she's a significantly lower class. This works for rags to riches as well, but she's lower class. Her father is a photographer. Well, not photographer, they do like silhouettes, and so she used to be a maid in a house, and then she kind of went home and started working with her father at this silhouette studio. And to kind of get rid of some steam, Kenneth dresses up as his valet to kind of get away and ride on horses. It's his way to like cope, de-stress, if you will. And he ends up running into her, and they strike up this friendship, and she thinks that he is the new valet. So it's their relationship, kind of what happens when all of the secrets come out. And I think it has a really beautiful story. I think it's really focusing on these characters. If you like Downton Abbey and things like that, this is really interesting because you're kind of getting the upstairs, downstairs feel to it. For this one, I'd say trigger warnings, since there are some for both physical and emotional abuse. So just be wary of that. There's a lot of talk of that, primarily with one of our main characters. It's a huge, huge part of the story. Not just talked about, but like you see it on the page and everything. But I really enjoyed this. It was, you know, kind of a breath of fresh air, if you will, after reading a lot of very smutty books. Don't get me wrong, I love the smutty books, but this is a good kind of like breather, if you will, and I personally really liked it. This one is an indie published book, and this one kind of, it's historical romance, don't get me wrong, but it tends to do other things. It has lots of fantasy elements as well, and that is The Midnight Bargain by C.L. Pope. This is another arc that I was graciously gifted, so I'll leave my review down below. This came out a couple of years ago, I want to say. But this is set in a world where magic is very much a part of life. Everyone has the ability to do magic, however, men are allowed to and women are not. Once you are married, you're given this kind of like collar of sorts, and it basically like steals your magic, so you're not allowed to do any. And so we follow our main character Beatrice, who all she wants to do is be able to practice magic. And she meets this brother and sister duo, and the sister is very interested in magic, and so they strike up a friendship because of that. And it's, you know, so at this time where, like, you know, her parents really want her to get married, and she really doesn't want to get married because then she'll have to wear this collar, and it's just this, it's real dark at times, actually, but it has this fantastical element of learning how to do magic. So this one is less historical romance than the rest of these, but it is kind of set in a Regency England time period, but with a little bit different. You know, if you embed magic in history, that's what you're getting with this one. I really enjoyed it, and this is, again, indie published. Beautiful book. Honestly, probably should get myself a copy because I remember enjoying this one so much. But if you want a little fantasy with your historical romance, this is for sure a book for you. The next one is A Marriage of Convenience, and there are so many that could work for this one, but the one that I'm choosing is The Duchess Deal by Tessa Dare. This is by far one of my favorites, I think, that she has ever written. This is from her most recent series. It's the first in her most recent series, called Girl Meets Duke, and it is a series of 4 books, although only 3 are currently out, and it follows these 4 friends in a friend group and each of their respective romances. This one follows the Duke of Ashbury and Emma. Now, Emma is a seamstress. She comes basically to the Duke because he was supposed to get married, and then he's not. He and his fiance have broken up, but she made this beautiful dress for his fiance, so she insists on getting paid for her labor, and he just needs an heir. So they strike up this deal where they get married, and they will, you know, connect every night until they have an heir, and then he can ship them off to the country, and she can live a very happy, lovely Duchess life. She can be taken care of, and he will have an heir to carry on the name. And of course, she's got some issues with that and put some stipulations into his rules. One of my favorite things about this is the moments that you see the two of them in the same room, because their banter is just like again, like, this is a good book if you like the banter and the quick wit, and Tessa Dare has such a very humorous writing style, and it comes through quite well in this series, but this book specifically. There are many moments where I literally laughed out loud at some of the stuff that our characters were saying and doing, and I loved it so much. So, Marriage of Convenience, that turns into real love, and I highly recommend this entire series, but this one is such a good one. The next one is just Rake, a book with a rake in it, and most of your historical romances will work for that because rakes are such a very big thing to write about. But the one that I've chosen for this one is Hazard by Jo Beverley. Out of all the books on this list, this is the one that I've probably talked about the least because I read this one many years ago before I even started my booktube channel, and it's actually probably worth a reread just to like remind myself about it. But we follow our main character, Lady Anne Peckworth, who is the sheltered daughter of a duke, and she's been jilted twice. And it follows her and this guy whose name is Race de Vere, who's a rake. Shocking, I know. It's the two of them, and I can't remember what it is, but something he does really ticks her off, and so she gets really, really mad at him. And it's like a hate to love romance of sorts, and the two of them are kind of like sucked into, like, they keep falling, like keep getting in the same situation. What is happening here? But the two of them keep like bumping into each other, and it's super cute. I also, if I remember correctly, there is some disability rep within this book as well, because I think there's an issue with Anne's foot that makes her limp and she's no longer able to dance because of it. I'm not 100% sure, but I know that's part of this book somehow. So a book, you know, a historical romance with representation, which is pretty great, and I just remember really, really enjoying this one. And it's got the shenanigans that you expect from historical romances. It's got the crazy ending as well, and I just remember really, really enjoying it. So, and I remember Race being a huge rake, so I highly recommend. The next one is a book featuring an heiress. Again, like Rake, heiress is pretty easy to find in any kind of historical romance, but the one that I'm going to choose for this one is It Happened One Autumn by Lisa Kleypas. This is the second in her Wallflower series, but this one follows an American heiress named Lillian Bowman, and her father has taken her and her sister and her mom over to England to find husbands because they've got all the money, so her mom really wants her daughters to have like titles. So she and her sister have come over to America, or to come over to England to find husbands. And this one specifically takes place as kind of like a country party. So what they do is, most times in Regency novels, or just in Regency time and like in general, you would find like they would go to a country party, which would be, you would go to someone's house for like weeks on end. And so that's what happens here. And they go to the house of Marcus Lord Westcliff, who is, I'm trying to remember what his title is. It's not going to tell me. He's an earl. There it is. He's an earl. And he has invited them, even though she ticks him off, she drives him crazy. He's invited them because he's hoping to team up with her dad, who's a big businessman. That's why they have loads of money, as he has become very wealthy because of, you know, the business that he does. And so it's their ridiculous relationship. But yeah, she comes with loads of money, and I just love them. Again, the banter between these two characters is incredible. So if you like that like verbal sparring kind of thing, another good one to read. The next one is a Highlander romance, and you guys, you thought you were getting away with it, but no, because of course I'm going to recommend Never Seduces Scott by Maya Banks, because again, one of my favorite historical romances of all time. So this one follows Evelyn, who is an Armstrong, and it takes place at a time where the Armstrongs and the Montgomerys, which are two rival clans, are at huge odds. They just fight and fight and fight, and the king is like, we're done with this. So he basically says to the laird of one land, you are going to marry the daughter of the laird of a different land, like of the different clan. So it's Evelyn Armstrong and Graham Montgomery, and so they are basically forced to kind of get married. However, Evelyn is thought to be very daft. No one, like, she had an accident when she was younger, and everyone kind of thinks that she's a little bit lost in the head. However, it's not true. She's just deaf, so she can't hear anybody anymore. And so she goes to this rival clan who hates her and this man who she's never met before in her entire life, and it's their relationship, and I adore this book so much. Like, I recently found a physical copy of it at my local used bookstore, and I went back to like tab the parts that I loved so much, and then I ended up basically like rereading this book because it was so good. But if you like that clan kind of clash, this is good. I would say trigger warnings, well, there's not really any sexual assault in there, but there's like threats of it, so be wary of that. But like their relationship is so pure, and just him and her learning about each other, like literally talking about it makes me want to reread this book. I loved it so much. So I will never stop recommending this book because it's my favorite Highlander romance of all time, but it's definitely one of my favorite romances too, because like, just do yourself a favor and read it. That's all I gotta say. Right, skipping over Western, we've got Clinch Cover, which, for those of you who don't know, it's basically like part of the cover is there's two people who are embracing in some way. So for this one, I'm going to go with Stranger in My Arms by Lisa Kleypas, because the Step Back has the two of them kind of embracing. Now, this is a relatively tame clinch cover compared to some of the other ones. Like, for example, this one would be considered a clinch cover of sorts. So it's just that kind of like embracing. So this one, we follow our main character, Laura, whose life is turned upside down because her husband is lost at sea. Well, she and her husband never really got along, so it works out for her. And then there are rumors that he actually wasn't lost at sea and he comes back, but is he actually her husband? Because things are different. Like, he's acting very differently than the man that she remembers. So it's the two of them as they embrace each other, this relationship, and also her trying to figure out, is this man actually my husband, or is he just someone who really, really knows my husband and like looks like him? You know, like there's just there's this question, there's a mystery that's running through this one. This is a good one for like flowers on a cover. I think Hate to Love could be good. Second Chance Romance would be good for this one. It was, I think, my very first Lisa Kleypas book, and I really did enjoy my time reading this one. And also like this cover, like it's so freaking pretty. But yes. Oh, if you like the Second Chance Romance with like a mystery element, this is your book. The next one is Enemies to Lovers, which honestly, I think everything except for maybe the Julia Quinn book you could use for Enemies to Lovers, but the one that I'm going to go with is actually Tender Rebel by Joanna Lindsey. This is the second in the Mallory Anderson series, but it's the first one that I actually read in this series, so like you can read them out of order. It's not gonna hurt. We follow a Scottish heiress named Rosalind who needs safety of marriage because her cousin is like super fortune hunting and like really is doing everything to get her money, and she's like, no thank you, I don't trust you. So she comes to England and hoping to find a husband who will protect her because she comes with a lot of money. So she's like, surely that'll get me someone who will want to marry me right away. And she runs into the lovely Anthony Mallory, who's a huge rake. And they strike up this deal of sorts. We're trying to help her find someone to marry. And of course, that's going to go great. Like, there's nothing that could possibly go wrong there. But I adore this book. I love Anthony as a character. He's so much fun to read about. And this was fun. Plus, it has that Scottish feel to it. I wouldn't say it's a Highland romance, but it does have that Scottish feel because our main character did come from Scotland. And when she gets really angry, her Scottish accent comes out. So if you're listening to it on an audiobook, that's a really cool way to do it as well. But I love their relationship because they're so like crazy. I will say, if you're not a huge fan of the miscommunication trope, there is some of that in this not like the end of it, but like leading up to the end of it, which I'm not a huge fan of that trope, but I didn't mind it in this book. I felt like it wasn't overdone, if that makes sense. But I love her writing. She's fantastic. I will never stop loving Anthony Mallory. Oh my god, he's one of my favorites. The next one is to read a book featuring spies in some way. So I am going to recommend Do You Want to Start a Scandal by Tessa Dare. This is one of those crossover books where it's the last in her Spindle Cove series, but it also was a crossover to her Castles Ever After series, which doesn't really have any connection except for all of them have to do with castles or someone who owns castles in some way. But it follows Charlotte Highwood. It takes place at this ball, and someone had a tryst in the library, and they think it's her with this rake of sorts, who she can't stand. Piers, who was a lord, and he and her basically are found together, and everyone is convinced that it's the two of them, and so she is trying to do everything to clear her name to prove that it's not them by finding the real culprits in the library. And spies are involved. That's all I'm gonna say. But Hate to Love is definitely fun. I liked their relationship. It's not my favorite I've ever read, especially not in this series or by this author, but it was fun, and the spy thing was very random. If you like puzzles, you know, I think you'll like this because Charlotte's very into puzzles and like solving and figuring out what's going on. So that mystery element, if you like that, this is good for this book. But yeah, I thought it was pretty good. And spies. I mean, you don't see spies too often in historical romances, at least the ones that I've read. So that was a fun change. And also mystery. We like a good mixed mystery here. And the last book is Flowers on the Cover. So a lot of these will work for this one as well, but the one that I have gone with is Scandal in Spring by Lisa Kleypas. Ironically, this is also part of the Wallflower series. This is the 4th book, and this follows the sister of the previous book, Lillian. So it follows Daisy, who's an American heiress. We've got flowers right here. But like I said before, her and her sister have come over to England to basically find husbands, and they've been here for so long that her dad is basically like, look, if you don't find someone by the end of the summer, aka in 2 months, I am going to marry you off to the guy that's going to take over my company. So like his apprentice. So Matthew shows up in England having no idea that her dad has proclaimed this, and she and him do not get along at all. But again, that verbal sparring, it's really great. I loved seeing their relationship bloom. And bloom, that's funny, I'm talking about flowers. But this was probably one of my favorites of the Wallflower series. Maybe I'd have to, I don't know, they were all so good. I can't quite pick a favorite. But I did like a lot of the scenes between her and Matthew and this relationship that they were building. I don't know. It's just a good one. It's a good one with like, the feel-good feels. Feel-good. That's what I said. That's what I'm sticking to it. So those are some of the historical romances that I have read that I highly recommend. I mean, just in general, I recommend all of these books as just blanket historical romances. But if you're particularly participating in the Historical Romance Readathon this go round, these would work really well for these prompts. But I hope that you guys enjoyed this video. Please let me know down below if you've read any of the books that I've mentioned in here, if you have some good recommendations yourself, just for historical romance in general, or specifically for the prompts for this round. I would love to know those as well. And if you'd like to comment something but you're not sure what to comment, comment any sort of flower. Because, I don't know, romance reminds me of spring, and spring is flowers, so flowers. But if you like this video, and I very much hope that you did, don't forget to give it a big thumbs up and subscribe down below if you'd like to be part of this awesome growing family. I've also got all my social media down there, as well as other fun bookish links, so don't forget to check all of that out, and I will see you guys in my next video. Bye!